Okay, so I wanted to talk today a little bit about matzah. We're preparing for Pesach. It's on everybody's mind already. And so just by way of introduction a little bit, the Seder is full of symbolism. We do all these kinds of things at the Seder, which are all symbolic. We have a maror, and we have arba kosot, and we have leaning, and we have charoset, all kinds of different things which are all laden with symbolism. That's the point of them. They're supposed to symbolize something. And generally speaking, can break down these symbols into two groups. Some things are a symbol of freedom, and some things are a symbol of slavery. Right? We're remembering slavery, we're remembering the fact that we became free, and so usually you can break things down that way. There are some things which seem to carry both ideas, seem to carry both symbolisms. Charoset, for example, we don't know exactly what it is. Is it zecher l'tit, the mortar that they used in Mitzrayim? Is it zecher l'tapuach, some sort of very poetic reference to the relationship between Bnei Israel and Hashem? But many of the cases where something has a double symbolism, it's usually because we don't know why. There's a little bit of an argument. It's not clear. Karpas is in that category. Is it about the springtime? Is it about slavery? Is it about nothing? We just want to stimulate questions from people. It's not exactly clear. So things have multi-symbol kind of purposes. When we start to look at matzah, though, things are very clearly rooted. As we're going to see, things are rooted in the Torah. The symbols of matzah are very clearly outlined. And as soon as we try and put our finger on what exactly is the symbol of matzah, we get confused almost immediately. So if we look in the Haggadah, and this is the beginning of the Haggadah, this is source 1 on the sheet also, Ha lachma anya diachlu avahatana ba'ara de Mitzrayim. This is the bread of distress that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. I think there are source sheets in the back. This is the bread of distress which our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. And so the idea seems to be, as we see in this source number 2, that this relates to slavery. This is the bread of distress, halach ma'anya, that we see in source 2. This described in the Torah, lo tochal alav chametz, shivat yamim tochal alav matzot, lechem oni. Ki b'chipazon yatzata me'eretz Mitzrayim, l'man tizkor et yom tzeitcha me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha. You're not supposed to eat chametz, you have to eat matzah, and matzah here is described as lechem oni, which we're going to deal a little bit with the technical definition, but it means the bread of distress at a simple level. So that, you start the Haggadah, great, we have matzah, we know exactly what the identity of matzah is. Matzah is lechem oni, it's bread of distress, we're all good. Then you go through Magid, you go through the whole experience of the Haggadah, and by the time we get to the end, we have this statement, which is here in source 3, about the symbolism of matzah. At the end of the Seder, the last thing we say in Magid before we start to eat things is that you have to mention the 3 components, Pesach, matzah, umaror, and each of those has a little paragraph in the Haggadah. What is it about? Why are we eating the Korban Pesach? Or we're not eating it today, but what is the Korban Pesach about? Why are we eating maror? And what is matzah? And so that paragraph you would expect, based on what we've seen, we eat matzah because of the slavery in Egypt, because this is the bread of distress. This is the bread that we ate in Egypt. And in fact, we find that's not true at all. If we look in source 3, we see that this has some kind of other description, but certainly it doesn't seem to have anything to do with slavery. Rabban Gamliel hayomer, kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu bepesach lo yatsa yedei chovato. So these are the 3 things that we have to mention at the end of the Seder. Ve'elu hen pesach matzah umaror. You have to mention Pesach, matzah, umaror. And then what is the description of maror? Matzah zu she'anu ochlim al shum ma. Why are we eating matzah? What is the purpose of it? The description is al shum shelo hispik batzeikam shel avotenu lachmitz ad shenigla alehem melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu. Because when Bnei Israel left Egypt, they didn't have enough time for their bread to rise, for the dough to rise, for them to be able to make it into bread. They had to run out of Egypt because God appeared to them, ugalam, and redeemed them. And this is also sourced, rooted in the Torah. Then the Haggadah quotes the appropriate psukim from Shemot, which describe this story. And as follows: Vayafu et habatzeik asher hotziu miMitzrayim ugot batzot kilo chametz ki gorshu miMitzrayim v'lo yachlu lihitma'amea v'gam tzeda lo asu lahem. They had to cook, they had to bake the dough that they had made in Mitzrayim into unleavened cakes, into matzah, because there wasn't enough time for it to become leavened, because they ran so quickly out of Egypt that there wasn't enough time for the bread to rise, the dough to rise. So we get stuck, right? You try and figure out what matzah is about. You start the Seder, it's bread of distress. You end the Seder, it has something that has to do with freedom. We ran so quickly out of Egypt that we're excited. Look at the matzah. My dough didn't even have time to rise. I ran so quickly out of Egypt. So, and both of these things are clearly anchored, clearly rooted in the Torah. So we have a double symbolism forming here in terms of the matzah, and it becomes very confusing. As we consider a little bit more carefully the things that we do at the Seder, we see that there's really two camps, there's really two sides to the matzah. So I wanted to look a little bit more at a couple of the things we do at the Seder, a couple of the other halachot of matzah, just to point out how deep this schism is, the two different sides, the two different ideas of this symbolism in matzah. One halacha that we have with the matzah is that which we see emerge out of source 4 here, is that the Torah describes it as lechem oni. It's pronounced oni, which may mean one of a couple of things. It's not exactly clear what that means. We translated it as distress before, but it's written with the letters ayin nun yud, which is the same as the word ani, like a poor person, a pauper. And because of that, we treat it like the bread of a poor person. And that's what we have here in source number 4, lechem oni, ani ktiv. It says lechem oni, but it's written as ani. We can read it as ani. Ma ani shedarcho beprusa, afkan beprusa, just like a poor person never completes their loaf of bread. They don't eat the full loaf of bread. They break off a piece and eat it, and they save the rest for later. So too with matzah, you have to treat it like a poor person treats their bread. Break off a piece, eat that piece, and save the rest for later. And this forms the basis for something we do at the Seder called yachatz, where you break the middle matzah and put part of it away. The matzah has to be presented as the bread of a poor person, as the bread of an impoverished person. That's a halacha which clearly seems to indicate this is the bread of distress, this is bread of slavery. Okay. What other halacha is there? There are other halachot which emerge out of the notion that matzah is the bread of a poor person, and one of them is matzah ashira. A rich person, if they're making bread, they'll put all kinds of nice things into the bread. You can put eggs into the bread, put fruit juices into the bread, make it taste nice by adding extra ingredients. A poor person doesn't have that luxury, and they have flour and water, and that's it. And so we find also that there's a halacha in terms of matzah called matzah ashira. We're not allowed to eat what's called the matzah of a rich person, or rich matzah, depending exactly how you want to translate that. And this is elaborated here in source number 5. Umuter le'achol bepesach matzah shenilosha b'mei perot afilu shata kol hayom. You're allowed to eat on Pesach matzah which was kneaded with fruit juice, even if it sat around the whole day. That's a whole discussion by itself. Maybe you can do that, maybe you can't do that. But what is clear, according to everyone, aval ein yotze b'yedei chovato mipnei shi matzah ashira v'kraktiv lechem oni. However, you cannot use matzah which has fruit juice or something else mixed into it to fulfill the obligation at the Seder, because the Torah says the matzah you have to use at the Seder needs to be lechem oni. It has to be bread of an impoverished person, of a poor person. A poor person doesn't put fruit juice or anything into their matzah, and therefore you can't use it at the Seder. So what we see here, fairly clearly, is that matzah has a kind of symbolism of slavery. We see that you have to break the matzah, you have to eat it like a poor person. We see that you're not allowed to put extra ingredients into the matzah because you have to eat it the way that a poor person would eat it. And these are things which we find at the Seder. On the other hand, there are other elements which we also do at the Seder that seem to indicate very strongly that matzah is not for poor people. It's a symbol of our freedom. It's a symbol of coming out of Egypt. We already mentioned the notion, this idea that we came out so quickly that the bread didn't have time to rise. But there are other halachas as well. One of the interpretations of the idea of lechem oni is that oni means dvarim she'onim alav dvarim harbe, mashu, something that you say lots of things, you speak a lot over it, you speak a lot about it. Onim alav dvarim harbe. And this is what we have here in source 6. Amar Shmuel, lechem oni, lechem she'onim alav dvarim harbe. lechem oni can be interpreted as bread which we speak a lot about. It's been supposed to interpreting it as lechem of poor people. We can interpret it as bread that you speak a lot about. And Rashi says, what does it mean? What are we taught? What does it mean that we speak a lot about the matzah? Rashi says in source number 7, she'onim alav dvarim, shegomrim alav et halal, ve'omrim alav haggadah. The matzah is on the table, and it needs to be on the table, and over it we're so excited about the symbol, whatever the matzah symbolizes, that we recite Hallel, and we say the whole story of the Haggadah and our exodus from Egypt. The entire discussion is made over the matzah. And that really sounds like it's a symbol of freedom. You're so excited, you have the matzah on the table, and you can tell the story of leaving Egypt, and you can talk about Hallel and praise God and be so excited about everything that happened based on the matzah that's sitting in front of you. So again, that is a core component of the Seder. We break the matzah, but at the same time, it's sitting on the table, and we're excited about it, so excited that it sort of becomes the basis for this discussion about leaving Egypt, about saying Hallel and praising God, and that really doesn't sound like slavery at all. Finally, there's another interesting halacha, which we have here, which is that certain elements of the Seder require us to recline. Right? We know that when we drink the arba koso, we have to recline. We're supposed to lean over. When we eat, we'll get to that in a second. But we drink the arba koso, we're supposed to recline. Which goes we recline for all of them. And we see here that the Gemara says that maror does not require heseba. You don't have to lean when you eat maror. That's what we do. You don't have to lean when you eat maror. However, matzah does require heseba. When you eat matzah, you need to lean over. It requires you to lean over. Why should this be? So Rashi explains this as well. In source number 9, the translation sort of cut over to the other page. Maror ein tzarich heseba, shehu zecher la'avdut. Maror does not require leaning because maror is a symbol of our slavery. And the idea of leaning is to show that we're free, to show that now we have the ability to lean. A person that's a slave doesn't have the opportunity to sort of lay out luxuriously. They have to be ready to work. So maror symbolizes our slavery. So it's sort of a contradiction to lean while you're eating maror. However, matzah, you do lean. Matzah tzricha seba. Rashi says kibnei chorin, like free people, shehu zecher legeula, because the purpose of matzah is to symbolize the redemption from Egypt, the fact that we are free. So you have there, black on white, the idea that matzah is supposed to symbolize freedom. And so we kind of get stuck. It's one thing for us to have things which carry dual symbolism, because we're not sure how to treat it, we don't know exactly where it comes from, what is the basis for it, so we treat it with lots of possible symbols. But as we've seen here, it's very clear, both in terms of the Torah's description, you have matzah as lechem oni, as the bread of distress, you have matzah as the bread that we ate because we had to leave Egypt so quickly that we didn't have time for the dough to rise. And in terms of the halachas of the Seder as well, we have ingrained into the idea in the Seder the notion that matzah is a symbol of slavery. We have to break it. We can't put extra stuff into it. It has to represent a bread of a poor person. On the other hand, we speak about it. We speak over it. We're excited in terms of the stories that we tell when we have the matzah in front of us, and we lean while we're eating it, which is something that we reserve for elements of the Seder that reflect the fact that we're free. So how exactly do you put this together? What can you do here to try and explain matzah? And I think, so what we're going to look at now is to try and talk about how you can sort of understand this. And what will emerge, I think, as well, is a third possible symbol of matzah. So that's going to come in a moment. A final point about this double identity, which we find here in source 10, is what the Ramban says in terms of the pasuk, the pasuk that we've seen before. I reprinted it. It was the second source. Now it's here again, but more of it is bolded. In source 10, Lo tochal alav chametz, shivat yamim tochal alav matzot lechem oni, ki bechipazon yatzata mimitzrayim, leman tizkor et yom tzeitcha me'eretz mitzrayim, kol yemei chayecha. Don't eat chametz. For 7 days you should eat matzot, the bread of distress, the bread of affliction. Why should you do this? Ki bechipazon yatzata me'eretz mitzrayim, because you came out of Egypt very quickly. Laman tiskoret yom tzeitcha me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha. And the Ramban sees here in the phrase lechem oni, the bread of distress, ki b'chipazon yatzata me'eretz Mitzrayim, a sort of double meaning, a double mention, a mention of both of the things that we've seen until this point. On the one hand, matzah is called the lechem oni, it's called the bread of distress. On the other hand, we have some sort of reference here to the notion of chipazon, of ki b'chipazon yatzata me'eretz Mitzrayim. You departed hurriedly. What is that talking about? Why did we depart hurriedly? So the assumption, we'll read it inside in a moment, the assumption is this is referring back to what we saw before in source 3, that we came out of Egypt so quickly that there wasn't enough time for the bread to rise. So that actually both of these things are being equated right here in the very same pasuk together. And this is what the Ramban understands. Ube'er bekan dvarim rabim. The Torah, many things are explained in this passage in the Torah. There's other things which are described as well. Ki hiskir b'matzah shetiyeh lechem oni, because it talked about matzah in the sense that it should be lechem oni, l'hagid ki tziva lizkor sheyatzu b'chipazon. It's the bread of affliction or the bread of distress, in the sense that we were told to leave very quickly. V'hi oni, or ani rather, and it's also the bread of poverty, zecher ki hayu b'mitzrayim b'lechem tsar b'mayim lachatz. Which is a mention of the fact that when we were in Egypt, we had very little food and water, and therefore we have to eat bread, which is reflective of that. V'hinei tirmos l'shnei dvarim. It mentions two things. There's two symbols. So we find this split at the very core. There's other things to discuss about this as well. I don't know if I want to get into them right now, but there's other elements of it as well. But we see this split. It's in the psukim, it's in the halachas of matzah, it's in the symbolism of matzah. How do we put this back together to make it into something? How do we understand it? How do we, and then subsequently, what do we get out of it? So I saw that Rabbi Soloveitchik suggests, Yosef Dov Soloveitchik suggests that he mentions some of these issues, and he suggests the following, or just points out the following. In terms of the physical manifestation of the matzah, the physical components of the matzah, what is it made out of? How do I treat it? How does it sit on the table? How do I eat it? Well, not how do I eat it, but how does it sit on the table? Those things are all reflective of slavery. The physical, actual matzah has to be the bread. That's the idea of having lechem oni. The physical matzah has to be the bread of a poor person. Bread which doesn't have any fruit juice mixed in, doesn't have any extra ingredients mixed in, bread which is broken and we only eat part of it, we don't eat the whole thing. That is all reflective of this idea of lechem oni, of the bread of a poor person. The way that we react to the matzah, the way that we talk about the matzah, the way that we think, the way that we feel when we eat it, that is all reflective of a feeling of being free. And that's what we see, right? The matzah has to be broken, it can't have extra ingredients. That's all about the physical composition of the matzah. But when we talk about it, when we are at the Seder and it's in front of us and we're onim alav dvarim harbe, we say Hallel over it, and we talk about the whole story of leaving Egypt over the matzah, and when we lean over like free people when we're eating it, that reflects the way that we're the way we're relating to the matzah, that we're relating to this symbol of the matzah. He has his own explanation in terms of how this works out. I just wanted to take that point, and I think it's very important. It's very instructive. The symbol, the physical symbol is one thing, and the way that we relate to it is something else. Okay, so what can we do with that? And I think in order to understand the symbol, we have to move back one more step and just ask another question, which is, why exactly is it that lechem oni, I mean, we talked about the lack of other ingredients, but why is lechem oni matzah? Why is the bread of a poor person specifically matzah, something that hasn't had time to rise? Why isn't it focaccia bread with them? Because focaccia bread has other ingredients. Whatever other kind of bread you could imagine, Wonder Bread. Why isn't it Wonder Bread? Wonder Bread is not expensive, and you can get it, and why is the bread of poor people specifically matzah, something that hasn't risen? Why isn't it some other kind of cheap bread without any extra ingredients? There are a bunch of different interpretations. Anybody know, just offhand, any potential answers to this question? And some people say it's because it fills you up very quickly, and if you have a slave, you want to feed them something that will fill them up, that will be cheap. You won't have to pay a lot for food. But the Sforno says something which I think is, that's possibility as well. It's not exclusive. but it's something which is profound. And Sforno says, this is in source 12 here, lechem oni, lechem shehayu ochlim ba'oni, v'shelo haya lehem pnai lehashot isatam ad shetichmatz mipnei nogsi matzin. It's the bread of distress because they would eat it in distress. When you're a slave, you don't have time. The person is pushing you, your master, the taskmaster, whoever, is pushing you to work as quickly as possible. They're only going to give you the minimum amount of time that it takes to make the food, to prepare the food. You don't have time for the bread to rise, for the dough to rise, because you need to work. You're a slave.
So they had matzah?
Right.
Before the Yetziat Mitzrayim?
Yeah, that's the assumption. This is the bread that we ate, like we said at the beginning of the Seder. Halach ma'anya. I mean, I guess that's not proof. But the idea was that this is the kind of food that they would eat while they were slaves. It's specifically the bread of a slave.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It was when they were leaving.
Right, so there was a mitzvah to make matzah before they left, and after they left, they ended up with something that was like matzah because they had to leave so quickly. But right, so we're adding an element here that this is also the kind of food that they would eat while they were slaves in Egypt. This is the bread that they would eat while they were slaves in Egypt. And the reason for that is because they didn't have time. Their time wasn't theirs to use. You're not free to use your time as a slave. And I think so. That's an important point. So what basically, if that's the case, the Torah is making an equation here. Before we left Egypt, we had to eat this kind of food because we didn't have enough time as slaves to be able to allow our dough to rise to make it into bread because our time was not our own to use. Once we did leave Egypt, we ended up with the same bread that we were eating before, but now it was for a different reason. Now it's because we ran out of Egypt so quickly after God that we didn't have enough time for the dough to rise. There wasn't enough time for the dough to rise. That's what we're setting up. So what really it means is that we're eating the matzah in Egypt, and we're eating the matzah after Egypt, and now, in a certain sense. But it has to do with some sort of change in our perception, some sort of change in the way that we understand this experience of eating the matzah that is critical. So what exactly is that change? And this, I think, that Sforno already begins this, and we can finish it in the second sort of sentence in source 12. Ki b'chipazon yatzata, v'hatam lazkir chipazon halechem, hu ki tmurat oto chipazon haoni, hayal achar kach chipazon hageula, ki inyan v'hafach bi'avelam l'sason. The reason why we have to mention the haste with which we left Egypt is because there was haste as a slave. We had to be hasty. We were forced to work quickly. And in place of that haste that we had when we were slaves, now we have the haste of following God. Now we have the haste of the Geula, which came so quickly that we're running after God. The way I think this can be interpreted here, and I think this is the key to interpreting the symbolism of the matzah, is that the matzah represents the redemption of our time and our efforts, our time and our work. We worked hard in Mitzrayim without barely any free time. And that really didn't stop when we left Mitzrayim. Hashem, so to speak, applied the pressure. We moved quickly. We had to run out of Egypt from the first moment. We literally left running. And that's why the matzah we eat at the Seder has all the physical characteristics of the same bread, because it's the same bread. We're eating the same bread now as we did then. We don't have time now, just like we didn't have time then. But the difference is internal. In Egypt, we served cruel masters, and the work was bitter because it was meaningless. We had to build cities for other people. This wasn't our own time. We didn't get to choose what to do. We didn't get to do something which was meaningful, which had purpose for us. When we left Egypt to follow God, that changed. We're still working hard. It's still difficult. There's still not a lot of time. But now the work has meaning. Now we're together with Hashem. We're involved in the historical purpose of bringing the knowledge of God to the world. We're involved with building our own society. We're involved with doing mitzvot, which provide meaning. This has ultimate meaning, ultimate purpose. And I think this idea is tied in nicely in this pasuk that we have here in source 13, which is the other mention. It's the follow-up after the Torah describes that you came out of Egypt so quickly that the dough didn't have time to rise. In source 13, Shivat Yamim Tochal Matzot B'Yom HaShvi Chag LaHashem. Matzot Yachal, there's a letter missing. Matzot Yachal et Shivat HaYamim V'lo Yer Lecha Chametz V'lo Yer Lecha Seor B'Chol Kulecha. You have to eat matzah. V'higadeta lebincha b'yom hahu lemor ba'avur ze asa Hashem li b'tzeiti miMitzrayim. You have to tell your son or your children on that day, saying, because of this did God because of this did God do for me, because of this did God do all of the acts for me when we left Egypt. And it's not exactly clear, because of this, because of what? But this is what we say at the Seder, and this is how this is interpreted, certainly by the Ibn Ezra, maybe others, because of the matzah, because of the mitzvot that I'm doing. Why did God take us out of Egypt? What was the purpose? What was the goal? It was in order to give us these mitzvot, in order to give us this lifestyle, which is filled with purpose and meaning, so that we can do it. Ba'avur zeh, because of the mitzvot, because of the matzah that's sitting in front of me. That's the reason why Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. And so what you're communicating there is that yes, in Egypt we worked hard and it was difficult and it was meaningless. And now we're also working hard. We have mitzvah. The Torah defines a whole way of life, and it's not an easy way of life. Nobody is saying that's an easy way of life. It's difficult, there's lots of work to do. But now, instead of doing meaningless work for cruel masters, we're doing meaningful work, which is best for us, which changes us, which makes us into better people for God, who loves us, who gave us all of these mitzvot in order to better ourselves. So the lesson that I think we can learn, we've seen the double kind of symbolism in matzah. We've seen the split between matzah being a symbol of slavery and a symbol of freedom. And we've seen this notion that it's a symbol of slavery only in the sense that externally, the way that we're behaving, in terms of working hard, in terms of not having so much time, is the same now as it was in Egypt. But internally, the meaning that's been granted there, the desire that we can have to do this work, that to drive us forward, that's what changed. Before we were forced to work, now we're running after God. And the lesson is important, because being a Jew is hard, especially at this time. Nobody needs me to tell them. This time of year is not an easy time of year for anybody. There's lots of work to do, and it can feel often like work, which it's not remotely religious. You don't feel like it's super religious to do all these kinds of things. But I think this is the idea of the matzah, that we gained what was redeemed, what was amazingly given to us by God when we left Egypt, was that all this work that we're doing, all the toil and the time that we put in, gained meaning, gained ultimate meaning and ultimate purpose. So hopefully we can keep this in mind a little bit at the Seder, and be zocha to really experience this feeling of gaining meaning, of feeling free in the sense that we feel meaning and purpose in terms of everything that we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.